Um, we are studying the Torah portion for Rashi Metzora, and we're now on the eve of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the first day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So we are going to start with chapter 14, verse 1, because whenever it's a double portion, we have to make sure that we give equal weight to both parshios, to both Tazria and Metzora. And we usually just get caught up in Tazria and we forget about Metzora. So let us start with chapter 14, verse 1. And so what we're going to discuss is the purification process of the Metzora. So the Metzora is the person who has this biblical skin disease that we call tsarat. It's usually translated as leprosy, but it really has little in common with the current medical condition that's diagnosed as leprosy. And there's many reasons why it's not actually that disease. But above all, it's because the Torah prescribes a spiritual healing, a spiritual process. You go to the Kohen. Kohen is a spiritual guide, and he's not a doctor. So this is the purification process for how you get rid of this disease. The Gemara in Erechen lists many things that cause this disease. It's caused by spiritual defects. The most famous spiritual defect to cause it is Lashon Hara. If a person speaks bad talk or evil talk about somebody else. So in this context, let's see the purification process. Yes. Yes, of course. Can people hear from this is Ben Wildowski, the scholar in our midst.
The beginning learner, but just glancing back at the last chapter where it talks about if there's a mark on a garment,
right?
It says the priest shall examine the mark, and he should examine the mark for 7 days. So if you're saying, well, this has to be a spiritual disease because it's the priests who were solving it in the chapter we're starting, in the previous chapter, that wasn't the case, right? How could a garment have spiritual?
No, so Ben's saying, how can a garment have a spiritual disease? And so therefore it's clearly not a spiritual disease. But I would respectfully say to my Chavrusa or Ben that your question proves that it's not leprosy. It proves it because you can't have leprosy on a garment or leprosy on a house. So for the fact that this condition manifests itself not only on people, but also on a house and also on clothing, demonstrates we're not talking about like an illness, but we're talking about a spiritual condition, which the Torah is punishing the people, punishing by placing this discoloration on their homes or on their clothing as a form of punishment. But it's not leprosy because you don't have leprosy on the clothing or on the home. So that's, I think, the question. And as the Hasidim say, the question is the answer. That's what they say. So the question shows the answer. The point is, it's not, there's no leprosy on a clothing or a house, but there is tzarat on the clothing or a house. Although the Talmud, we saw in Sanhedrin, says there never was or never will be such a what's called a bayit menuga, a house that was afflicted with this tzarat. So the majority opinion of the Talmud is that it actually never happened. So anyway, we're getting on a tangent here. So anyway, so God spoke to Moshe and said, "This is the Torah of the Metzora." What a beautiful phrase! Zot tia Torah Metzora, biyom tarato. This shall be. Now we know Torah is our Torah scroll, but here the word Torah means the law. So this is the law of the Metzora on the day of his purification. He comes to the Kohen in order to be purified. Rashi says, Torah Metzora, biyom tarato, on the day of his purification. It teaches us that they do not purify him at night, but at night, but only during the day. So the Yatsa HaKohen El Mechutz L'Machaneh, and the Kohen shall go outside of the camp. V'ra'ah Kohen Minei Nirpa Nega Hatzarat Min Hatzarua. So how do you purify the person who has tzarat? The Kohen goes out from the camp, and the Kohen sees, and behold, the person who had the tzarat has been healed from the affliction of tzarat, min hatzarua. He's been healed from it. So where is the Kohen going? He's going outside the camp. What does this mean? He's going outside the camp. Where is he going? So the Metzora, we're chapter 14, up verse 3. The Metzora was sent forth from 3 camps, Rashi says. Chutz l'shlosha machanot, shenishtalach sham b'mech chaluto. He was sent there in his day of absoluteness. What does this mean? Let me just, because it gets a little confusing. So there were 3 camps in the wilderness. What were the 3 camps? The camp of the divine presence. That was the camp of the Mishkan. That was called Machaneh Shechina. And there were the camp of the Levites, which was called Machaneh Leviim. And then there was the camp of the Israelites, which was called the Machaneh Yisrael. So the Metzora was sent forth out of all 3 camps. The person who was Tamei Meit is just only sent forth from one of those camps, from the camp of the divine presence. The person who has a tumah that you could be purified at night, like for example, if he touched a sheretz, or if he had rosh, if he has a what I was saying is, I just lost my train of thought because I keep my text on, because so I want to make sure people are on time if they're canceling for the mincha. And somebody sent me a message which was hard, like painful, because I saw he's going through a personal struggle, and so I lost my train of thought. But let me get it back. So that if the person is sent, if he's tamei meit, he's sent out from the Machaneh Shechina. If he's tamei from having a seminal emission, then he's sent out from the Machaneh Leviim. But if he's a Metzora, he's sent off for 3 out of all 3 camps. This corresponds in Jerusalem, in when the Beis Hamikdash was built. This corresponds to being sent forth also from Jerusalem. That corresponds to the Machaneh Yisrael. The Machaneh Leviah is the Temple Mount, and the Machaneh Shechina is the Beit HaMikdash's courtyard itself. Now he was sent there during the days of Chiluto, that if he was a certain Metzora, he had to be outside the camp for 7 days until he was clear that he was purified. That's what this is referring to. So what is the process? The Tzivah Kohen, V'lakach Amitaher, Shtei Tziporim Chayot Tahorot. And the Kohen shall command, and he shall take for the person being purified 2 birds that are Chayot Tahorot, 2 birds that are live and pure. The 8 erez, and we'll see what pure means. And he also takes cedar wood, ushni toat ve'izov, and crimson thread and hyssop. Now, let me just stop for a second and say, a lot of people might be thinking, what does this even have to do with me? Like we live in the 21st century. We've got the internet, we've got artificial intelligence, and you're wasting my time by talking to me about, nobody on this share, either in person or in Zoom, would be saying this, but something like that. You're talking to me about some ancient practice, some ancient disease, which we don't have today, and you're giving me this hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo to purify. Like that, he's supposed to take 2 live birds and cedar wood and crimson thread and a hyssop. What are we even doing here? So I want to argue that this is, of all the portions in the Torah, this may be the most relevant. Because what we're talking about is a person who has a disease, or he has done something in his life that has caused him to be uh, exiled from the community, or to be exiled might be not the right word, to be had to leave the community, and he wants to go back in. He needs to go back in, and it's talking about a re-entry ritual into the society. This idea of a re-entry ritual is something that we all need to be considering when we think about people who've gone through things in their life that, for whatever reason, have caused them to leave the community. They've had to leave either through a mistake that they made or through no mistake of their made, but no mistake they made, but something that caused them to have to leave. And it's not healthy to just pretend, okay, I could just go back in and life is normal. It's not healthy for that person, and it's not healthy for the society either. And so, therefore, that's what this is talking about, the need for a re-entry process. So although we don't have this exact re-entry, we should think about the themes that are done here, and we should consider that people need, after every illness, people need a re-entry into society. We have a little bit like this today. There's a concept within the halacha of what's called the sudat ha'udaya, that after a person recovers from an illness, he or she should make a Thanksgiving feast, what's called the Sudat Hodaya, an expression of gratitude to God. So that's a little bit of this process. But that's what we're talking about here, a re-entry ritual into society. So what does this Rashi say? Rashi says the Kohen shall command, and he shall take two birds that are living, pratotrefos. Chayot means that they can't be birds that have a mortal wound. Teorot. What does it mean pure? It doesn't mean ritually pure. It means that they're kosher. Prat of tameh, a non-kosher bird, meaning the word they have to be a kosher bird. The fisha nagayim, and here is Rashi's telling us that a person is going through this ritual, and we have to be really careful about this today, because the last thing we ever want to say to somebody who's sick is that you got this illness, God forbid, because you were doing mistakes. Like, the reason why you got this illness is because of something that you were doing spiritually wrong. But I would also argue that society does this subtly. Like today, we don't say that you were sinning. That's what we said back then. But we'll say, oh, the reason why you got this disease is because you weren't living a healthy lifestyle. And in a sense, we're blaming the person who has the illness. To whatever degree it's connected, it's also not helpful. But the tradition here, the rabbinic tradition, is saying that as part of the reentry process, you have to look at yourself and your lifestyle and take stock of that and see if you're actually one to the left, Greg. Oh yeah, you got it. We're doing the Chumash. Greg, great to see you. That you should take stock of your life and see spiritually and see how you can improve. And that's how we could put it in a positive manner. Greg, a big shkoyach to you. Good Chodesh Tov, because the name is Rosh Chodesh. Yeah, if anybody wants to join us for the Nates, it's tomorrow morning at 5:53 a.m. I love it. I love it. And God willing, I'm going to say this right now in public, and please hold me to it. 1 month from now, which Amirat Hashem is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we're going to try to gather in the park. It's going to be 30 minutes earlier, 5:23. So maybe we'll find a nice park, maybe Sligo Creek Park or something. We go to park benches there. We have to figure out how we could do it, and we'll just dive in there. What do we think about that, Ben? 5:23 in the park. That'll be geschmack. Be beautiful. Diving outside. Yeah. Okay, anyway, so Ta'arot, to the exclusion of a non-kosher bird. Why? Lefisha negayim bayin al lashon hara. Because as the Gemara in Erech 15b says, the afflictions, the taras, came about because a person sinned by doing malicious talk. Shu ma'isa pitpute dvarim, which is an act of, this is the Rashi. How do they translate that in your Sefaria, Ben?
So it's actually a great connection to today's Europe.
Yeah.
To make the point that it's not irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because it says the plagues of leprosy comes to punishment for slander, which is done by chattering. Therefore, birds are compulsory for the leper's purification because these shatter, as it were, continuously with a twittering sound.
There you go. So it's a twittering sound. The twittering is what caused this condition. Now, Twitter, look, my general philosophy to life is everything is just a tool, and you can use it for good or for bad. But there is so much bad. There's so much misuse of the tremendous gift that God gave to us of the internet, of social media, which can be such a gift. If you go on Twitter, you see so much hate and violence. You see a lot of good also, but you see so much hate and violence. And so this is the sin of twittering. This is literally the sin of twittering. Can you imagine if everybody this week looked at ourselves? Good afternoon, Kobe. Good afternoon, Moshe. Good afternoon. Grab the Chumash, boys. Let's go. So, could you imagine if everybody this week in preparation for Parshas Rashi Metzora decided to take a good look at their twittering and see if we're twittering in a proper manner, with whether what we say or how we say it or what we look at on Twitter or what we promote. Can you imagine if this was the week of improving our twittering? That's why he brings the bird offering. Anybody here on Twitter? Are you on Twitter? Akiva? Kobe?
No.
Moshe? Just Ben. Ben and me. What? But no, Twitter is not just politics. It's everything. It's entertainment. It's sports. Lincoln is probably Dror is here. Dror, how many followers? You must have like 400,000 followers on Twitter. How many do you have?
Let me tell you.
He has like
64K.
64,000 followers. Yeah, but this is the portion. Oh, he's Dror is one of. We want to be. This is being recorded, so maybe take away your picture. I don't want people to know about you. Dror is he's a leading dissident in a country that's very bad for the Jews. Dissident is somebody who raises a voice and protests, and he was in prison for many years. Yeah, many times. Yeah. So Dror, there's a lot of people who use this Twitter to do good. I remember when there was when they had some of the revolts in Iran, that they were spreading it with Twitter. But now the governments have caught on to that, and they use it for bad, and they use it for the Nazis use it. So it's for the sins we make with the verbal twittering. By the way, Hugh, we'll be okay. You don't need to stay for us. Thank you. I'll see you in the morning at 5:53. Yeah, because it's Rosh Chodesh. We daven sunrise. Sunrise, Elon. So anyway, that's the mistake of verbal twittering. So it's Lashon Hara. Today, that's another thing I want to say about Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is bad talk. Usually you say about somebody else. We are all guilty of this, and in more ways than one. First of all, we're all guilty of saying it. We're all guilty of listening to it. Nothing that gets us going as some good juicy Lashon Hara. All of a sudden, everybody listens in, and it's so sad that that's what our human nature is receptive to. And we have to work on it. Just because we've fallen many times in this area doesn't mean we should give up. Doesn't mean we should give up and not try. So we should keep trying to improve in this area of using positive language to talk about people, to talk to people. And we should just leave the conversation if people start talking bad. You're not going to be able to convince somebody to stop talking. But our first and primary responsibility is to ourselves, not to sin spiritually. We should just leave the conversation. If people are talking bad, we should just leave the room. That I'm just giving you realistic advice. If you say, "Oh, stop talking Lashon Hara," people will find and work on ourselves. So that's a very, very, it's a very big spiritual defect to talk bad about other people. Very, very big spiritual defect. And it's also a very big spiritual defect to listen as other people talk bad about people. It's a huge problem. And the problem is a communal problem, a societal problem, and we all tolerate it. Like if somebody was in our social social orbit and that person was, let's say the person was a murderer, we wouldn't say, oh, come on over for Shabbos lunch. I'll just chill with you. Because we're saying, no, that person's a murderer. We don't want them in our home. We don't want them. I mean, some people will have everybody over because they're the greatest righteous people in the world. But most people say, you're a murderer, you're a child abuser, you're not coming anywhere near my home. But a person who's a gossip, we're like, okay, fine, you can come on over. Because, so in a sense, what we've all done is we've tolerated that sin. We've said that sin is not a big sin. But really, that sin is destructive of the community. If you look at it from the bird's eye view, it's just a horribly destructive sin. And we make ourselves feel better by talking bad about other people. What do you think about that, Colby? You agree with me? Yeah. Yeah. So the answer is we have to start with ourselves. Start with ourselves by trying to improve. And we will feel better. Yeah, we might not know the latest gossip, but so what, right? So what if we don't know the latest? So what if we don't know the latest gossip? We don't know who's fighting with whom or who got into trouble or who's going to jail or who's doing this. Who cares? We'll be fine. We'll be fine. So, I mean, if we don't know, right?
Yeah. Or just start saying, don't do that stuff.
We
never know.
Are they in a war? Because they have nuclear weapons, so that's serious stuff. So, let's hope they're not in a war. Let's hope it's just a skirmish. Anyway, Rashi says, therefore, we're chapter 14, verse 4, because since this was an act of verbal twittering, therefore there was required for the sufferer's purification, the Purim, Shemefatfen Tamid, because birds are always chirping. And so that's why we use the birds. Now, why do we use cedar wood? Eitz erez, lefisha negayim bayin al gaso saruach. Why? So we've seen one reason why these afflictions come is because of the sin of verbal twittering. Another reason is because they come because of arrogance. And therefore we're using the birds, which is it's verbal twittering, and the cedar tree, which is about arrogance, because it's a very tall tree. Therefore, because of this haughtiness, we throw it in there, because all sin really comes, all intentional sin is coming as a result of arrogance. How so? What does that mean? It means, why are we talking bad about the other person? Because we think we're better. We think we're better. If we didn't think we're better, we wouldn't be talking bad about them. If we wouldn't, you say, oh, you see that guy? Look at that guy. I saw him eating pork on Yom Kippur, because we think we would never do that. So therefore, we think we're better than the other person. So all sin at its cause is that we think we're better than them, and that's why we look down upon the other person. So it comes from this arrogance. You had a question, Ben? Yeah. So it's very hard to say, because if we're being honest, we've all done on some level sins of a certain nature. Ushni tolas ve'ezov, and crimson thread and hyssop. And why do we have this? What is the remedy? How do we get rid of arrogance or malicious talk? He should lower himself from his arrogance, like a worm and like a hyssop. These are the lowest elements of society. Like a hyssop is like a lower bush, and a worm is really on the ground. So the key to spiritual improvement is humility. Of course, you can say, this is pointed out many times, humility is the type of spiritual behavior. You can't say, I want to be humble. If you say, I want to be humble, then you've missed it. That's not how you're humble. That's just, you can't say, I want to be humble. That won't work. So if that's the case, how are you humble? How do you become humble? That's the question. By now what?
Like saying anything bad.
Well, that's helpful. Actions. What do you mean by actions?
Just like saying,
yeah, but it's not so. Okay, so it's actions speak louder than words for sure. Just like working on not talking. That's about other people. I agree with that. I agree with that completely. But I think the rabbinic, the classic rabbinic approach is to reflect on your position in this world, and on what is our position in this world? We are maggots. We are basically maggots. What do you mean by that? Why do I say we're maggots, Elon? Yeah, because we're basically most of our existence on this world will be in the ground, being eaten by maggots. We're above the ground for just a small amount of time, but most of the time we're basically a maggot. So, what
It's
it's true if you start thinking about it. I don't care if you're Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Moshe Rabbeinu, that we all end up in the same place and being eaten by the maggots.
not the one,
What?
not the one, not
Okay, just one person in history.
the
So that's the idea. That's what? Elijah the prophet went up to heaven. Okay, maybe you have a couple of people who jumped into Garden of Eden alive, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, fine in the Talmud. Okay, so most likely the overwhelming probability is that none of us are going to be like Eliyahu and Navi or Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi getting into the Garden of Eden. That's not our probably not our blueprint for the future for all of us. Most likely we are maggots, and therefore we have to reflect upon that, reflect upon the fact that no matter how great we think we are in our own mind, we're just not. And we are just a maggot and it's so small. And so therefore we have to think about our mission, our responsibility as human beings, as Jews, and how do we serve? And that's like the classic rabbinic direction towards humility. You have something to add to that, Elon?
No, I'm just saying, it sounds like a drill position. Now they call it, do 50 push-ups, maggot.
No, I think. Well, I usually don't like to talk like this, and I don't like to talk like this to other people. I'm just saying to ourselves how we get to. We should be saying this to ourselves. We should never ever call another person a maggot. Obviously, it's that's the thing. People have to come to this on their own. You have to realize, but at the same time, you have to realize this reflection on humility should push us to never stop working. Because it reminds us that we have a spiritual mission. We have a task to serve God. We can never stop. Like if we just sit there, chilling in our, on our couch all day, every day, not working, then we're denying our spiritual responsibility. So this reflection should push us to work even harder, not to push us to a depression, but should push us to work even harder. I just want to say before we stop, I want to say a couple of unusual things that we have this week with